Welcome to Theology Unleashed. Sorry for the delay getting started. I was trying to get the audio sync working. Today we've got a debate between TJump and Josh Wulf on is atheism an overreach? We'd agreed to define atheism as the positive belief that God doesn't exist for the purpose of the debate. Obviously, people have different ideas what the words mean. This is what we're meaning today. And I'll hand it over to Josh Wulf to give us his opening.
Thanks, Arjuna. My name is Josh Wulf, and welcome to everyone who's viewing this today, and to the millions of people who are viewing this in the future via the magic of the internet. And welcome to my esteemed opponent, TJump, all the way from the United States. He's taken a break from his presidential campaign to come and debate me on this topic. Really appreciate it. A little bit about me. I'm 46 years old. I'll be 47 in a few months. And I joined the Hare Krishnas when I was 23. So I've been practicing that for like the last 23 years. And I'm originally from New Zealand. That's where I live now. But I've spent 20 years of my life living outside of New Zealand in various places, South America, Australia, and traveled quite a bit around the world. I work in software, computer programming. And I'm still obviously a practicing Hare Krishna, and I have a son, married. My wife's a Hare Krishna as well. Met her sort of at the same time that I became a devotee. And we have a son who was born in Peru. He's now 18. He grew up in Australia, but he now lives in New Zealand. And his mother's from the United States. I'm from New Zealand, so he's kind of a citizen of the world as well. So to the topic of our debate today, is atheism an overreach? So if we want to have a look at this idea of what atheism is, because I know atheism is kind of undergoing a bit of a transformation in terms of how people perceive it or present it. And Arjuna made the point that we agreed for this debate that we would conceive of atheism as the positive claim that there is no God, God does not exist. But I also want to have a look at another couple of softer forms of atheism that I would consider not to be an overreach. So you have this idea of atheism that's almost like an agnosticism, which is the claim that kind of there's insufficient evidence, and one of these two, either we don't know, by which I mean nobody knows, and if you want to make that a little stronger, you could say nobody could know, and then there's an even softer version of that, which is I don't know. So, I mean, atheist literally means without theos or God, or in Latin or Spanish it would be Dios, without God. So agnosticism, which comes from the Greek meaning agnosis, which means like without knowledge, means I don't actually know whether God exists or not. So that's kind of like an absence of a positive knowledge or an absence of a positive claim. And if that's a personal experience, it's just like, I don't really know personally. It's one thing. You can make that stronger by saying, well, nobody knows. And you can make that even stronger by saying nobody can know. And then, the type of atheism that we're talking about today is where you take it to the nth degree, like outside of that domain entirely, and you say, we actually do know, and we do know that God does not exist. That's a positive claim for the non-existence of God. Positive claims for the non-existence of something are problematic from a scientific point of view because it's always possible that something exists that you don't actually know about. Even, you've heard the saying, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So to conclusively, the science is settled kind of, the jury is in, the verdict is that God does not exist, is a claim that requires an extraordinary amount of proof, to establish it. And I would say that even within the scientific model, if we're utilizing that, you couldn't even actually make such a claim, and such a thing doesn't exist. But even leaving that aside, like I would say, first of all, that it's actually logically and scientifically impossible to make that claim and have it be a scientific claim. That we know everything that there is to know, and we know within everything that there is to know that God does not exist. The first thing is we don't know everything that there is to know. So there's always, this kind of God of the gaps idea is always there that, okay, well, maybe there's just something that we don't know. Maybe he's like invisible and we can't see him. But that's just like looking at it from a logical and a scientific perspective. One thing we can be sure of is that if there is some supreme being who exists outside time and space and is the source of time and space itself, since the instruments of perception that we use are the material senses, which are designed and intended for interacting with the material energy itself, there's no way that those senses could themselves perceive some source which is beyond that. And then when we go to the absolute limits of what we can perceive scientifically, we run into the quantum mechanical problem of the double slit experiment, where mathematically, it turns out that when we're not actually perceiving or looking at concrete particles, they don't actually exist as concrete particles. So the fundamental nature of reality itself, mathematically, when we drill right down to it, turns out to be something completely imperceptible to our material senses. But we can arrive at it through logic and through mathematics. And it was Albert Einstein, I think he was walking with either Dirac or Heisenberg, and he said to him, "Are you saying that when I'm not looking at the moon, that the moon doesn't exist?" Maybe it was Schrodinger. It was one of those guys. And that other physicist said to him, "Yes, that's the conclusion of quantum mechanics." And, quantum mechanics is one of the most well-proven kind of sciences that we have. And a lot of our modern technology is based on that. And that's just the stuff that they let you know about. But moving on from that point, which is an ancillary digression, here's the thing, is that it is technically impossible for us to perceive God directly with our senses. So we should not expect to find any evidence through that, method of inquiry. And in the Vedas, it actually says that the Supreme Brahman is that which, going towards the mind and the thoughts, turn back. They cannot reach it. So that is what is called in the Vedic idea the ascending method, or we would probably call it like the deductive kind of method. So the way to understand and to gain knowledge about God is to gain it through a descending process. And atheism is 100% an overreach, because God literally appears in the material world in order to proclaim to the conditioned living entities living in this world, "I exist. This is who I am. And this is how you can know me." So 5,000 years ago, Krishna appeared in this world and said, "Hello, I'm God. Aham sarvasya prabhavo." Everything emanates from me, all spiritual and material worlds. And here is the process by which you can know me without a doubt. So that process is given by Krishna himself. And the process that Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita is the chanting of his holy names, specifically the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Now, that's one particular way of getting to know God, by chanting those names. But I've lived in many countries. Like, I lived in South America, and in South America they call the sun El Sol, and in France they call it Soleil, and in the mountains in Ecuador they call it Inti. That's what the Quechua name for the sun is. So those are different names, but it is the same object that is indicated by those names. So you find human beings all over the planet who will chant the holy names of God, whether that's Allah, Yahweh, Jehovah, and obviously Krishna. And this is the process by which you can know directly and experience the existence of God. And the way that we know about that is because God literally comes into the material universe periodically in order to communicate that to the living entities who live within the world. And then that knowledge is received, through transmission from people. So, Krishna has said it himself in Bhagavad Gita, and then great sages like Valmiki and Vyasadeva have also accepted that, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there's a claim of the existence of God, the identity of God, and the process by which you can verify for yourself that God exists. And it's not an ascending process using science or, investigation, which we know are epistemologically flawed or epistemically defective in that they can never reach to that supreme transcendent being. But that supreme transcendent being can make his existence known to the living entities directly by coming in, and he does that. So given that that is the case, that we can never conclusively establish the non-existence of something without having complete, absolute knowledge of everything, which we know that we don't have because of quantum mechanics at the very least, and the fact that God comes into the universe and says, I exist, this is who I am, this is how you can know me, atheism is 100%. And when I say atheism, I mean the positive claim that God does not exist, 100% an overreach.
All right. So does that conclude your opening speech?
Yeah, I can't drop my mic because it's on a stand.
All right, let's hand it over to TJump to.
Good. All right, so I am an atheist, by which I normally mean I believe there is no reason to believe in a God. Normally, I don't defend the position there is absolutely no God. But that is a defendable position. Most of the philosophers in the philosophy of religion who are not theists do take that position, like Graham Opie, for example, Alex Malpass, those kinds of guys. The way they justify this is with a position called fallibilism. Fallibilism is the position in philosophy that you can have knowledge without absolute certainty. So you don't need absolute certainty or to know absolutely everything to be able to know some things, or to make conclusions about the fundamental nature of reality. For example, you can know there is no God in the same way you can know there is no unicorns, because everything is imaginary until demonstrated otherwise. When we see something in the world, like if we see a cup fall over and we want to know what caused the cup to fall over, we can come up with infinitely many ways to explain how the cup fell over. Maybe it was the wind, maybe somebody bumped the table, maybe it was a leprechaun, maybe aliens, invisible unicorns, whatever. You can make up infinitely many ways to explain what knocked over the cup. But in order to come up with a reasonable explanation, you need to be able to provide a external reason to believe that that explanation exists independently of your imagination. Like, it's not just something you made up. And so to do that, you have to make some kind of novel testable prediction. Like, for example, if my hypothesis that a squirrel knocked over the cup is correct, then we'll be able to look around the cup and see little squirrel droppings. And then if we can see that, like, yes, that means that explanation is real and exists independently of my imagination. We have a reason to believe it exists in reality. And the other ones, which have not been able to do that, we have no reason to believe they exist in reality, and we have sufficient reason to believe they are imaginary, because the only justification for them is the fact that somebody imagined them. The same thing applies to a God. If you hypothesize that there is a God that does things in the world, if you want to show that your hypothesis is not imaginary, you need to be able to make some kind of novel testable predictions. If you cannot do that, then it is reasonable to conclude that your God is imaginary and only exists in your head. And if all such God beings are only things that have ever been shown to be imaginary in people's heads, and there is no reason to believe there is any particular one that exists outside of our heads as anything more than imaginary, then it is reasonable to conclude there is no God. They're all just imaginary concepts we've made up in our head. And so the position of atheism as a belief that there is no God is completely justifiable, just like the position that there are no mythical creatures like leprechauns and the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, unicorns, cyclopses. It's reasonable to conclude there are none of those such things because, again, the only evidence for them is that they've been made up in our heads. So until you can actually demonstrate with some kind of evidence that can show a God being is outside of our imagination, it is reasonable to conclude all such God beings are, like all such mythical creatures, just a category of things we humans have made up to make ourselves feel good. So the position of atheism, as a strong atheism, is perfectly justifiable because no evidence is presented that a God actually does exist, and it is therefore reasonable to conclude that gods are simply imaginary things.
Cool. All right, so now we can move to open discussion. Who wants to start?
There is a difference between a unicorn, a leprechaun, the Loch Ness Monster, and Bigfoot, and the Supreme Being who is the source of all spiritual and material worlds. And that is that leprechauns, unicorns, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster are all material manifestations, whereas God is categorically distinct from those. For example, a leprechaun...
Mind if I just interrupt right there? Well, that's not the case. There are many mythical creatures like ghosts and spirits who are not physical things. So the qualities of the thing being positive makes no difference. It doesn't make a difference if it's physical or non-physical or supernatural, ubernatural. It makes no difference. Everything is imaginary until demonstrated otherwise. And so if you want to hypothesize that there is a god or a ghost or a leprechaun, physical, non-physical, you can add whatever properties you want to it. It makes no difference at all. Until you can show it's not imaginary, well, then it's reasonable to conclude it is purely imaginary, whether it's physical or not.
Well, I challenged that first point that you made there, that, ghosts and, supernatural, what you called supernatural phenomenon there, that they are in a Venn diagram in the same circle as leprechauns. And then in another circle this is a supreme being who is transcendent to the material world and is the source of it. Now, neither ghosts, leprechauns, Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, they fall into a Venn diagram with TJump and Josh Wulf as posited entities within the material universe. None of those are posited as a transcendent source of the material universe. So they're categorically different.
No, people can assert them to be whatever they want to assert them to be. You can assert them to be outside of space-time, or you could assert them to have created God if you want. You can say there is a magical leprechaun that created the Hare Krishna god, Brahma. You can assert them in any way you want. It makes no difference to the hypothesis. So the qualities of the thing you're asserting are irrelevant. What matters is, can you show that they exist in reality independent of your imagination? So
yes.
That would be the question. As long as you can't do that, then atheism is justified.
Yeah, so you have to deal with the fact that Krishna comes into the material world and says, I exist.
Like
and
Jesus?
Here's a process by which you can know me.
Like Jesus?
Well, Jesus doesn't say he's the source of all spiritual and material worlds.
Yeah, he did. Alpha and Omega. That's kind of what it means.
The beginning and the end?
Yes, so of everything. That is kind of the point. In the beginning, there was the Word.
And I was with the Word, is what he said. He didn't say, I am the Word.
You can take that interpretation if you'd like, but the classical Christian interpretation is that the Word came from God. The Word was the God that was the beginning. And prior to the Word, there was just the God. And so the Word was, in fact, the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang, more or less.
Well, we are not interested in interpretations. We're interested in what he actually said. And Krishna says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. So why you don't accept that?
Well, I don't. What they particularly said doesn't make a difference. Again, you can put anything into your hypothesis you want. You can say, I believe there is a round square, and then that's fine too. Like I couldn't care less. Mm-hmm. The only thing that matters is, can you show that your imagined hypothesis exists in reality independent of your imagination? The fact that they claimed whatever they claimed, if they claimed they were a round square, again, that would make no difference one way or the other. You'd still have to show, was what they said correspondent to something in reality, or was it just imaginary, like even if they existed?
Yes. So that is why Krishna says, here is a process by which you can know me without doubt, asamshayaha. And so by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, you can know without a doubt that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So why you don't take that and try it?
Okay, let's try it. What is it?
It's Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Let me help you out here. I can do this.
Put it in the chat. I'll just
streaming it live.
Can you make it go faster? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare, Hare, Hare Rama, Rana, Hare Rana, 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 Hare, Hare. Was something supposed to happen now? Was it magic words? Oh God, there he is. He's up there. He's purple and pink and looks a lot like Jesus.
We just ruined TJump's career.
So it's like, just ruined your career as an atheist. You're now a devotee of Krishna.
Yep.
One who even chants the name of Krishna once is a devotee of Krishna.
Awesome. Can I get paid now? Does he like send a check to my bank account every month? Is that how this works?
Spiritual credits only. Well, it's like, you see, the thing is, it's a process, like anything, like, I mean, you don't go to school on the first day and suddenly, okay, now I know everything that there is to know about this thing.
Yeah, but you normally learn one thing at least. So that phrase gave me nothing. I've learned nothing.
No, you have. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
I do not know that.
Well, it's a working hypothesis that you can test. It's like going to the gym to get six-pack abs, It's a process that you go through to get it. Not everyone has six-pack abs, but
I go to the doctor and get liposuction. That's how I get six-pack abs. That's much, much easier. But so even if we take this hypothesis you think is true, that's great. The test has failed so far, so until it actually starts to succeed, I have no reason to believe in God, and I'm justifiably an atheist, that there is no God and it's just imaginary and there's nothing beyond that.
Well, that would be like saying that, like, I did some crunches and like changed my diet for one day, but I don't have six-pack abs, therefore it's imaginary. But people do have six-pack abs. And many people have reported that by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, they attained God realization. And there are many accounts of that throughout hundreds, thousands of years.
Okay, but their accounts aren't evidence. So if I had like an account of a 300-pound man saying he had six packs like months ago, I'd be like, that's great. Could you actually demonstrate this in some way? Their testimony isn't evidence it's actually true. It's just more things in their imagination. Again, the criteria here is you need some way to differentiate. Is this in our imagination or is it in reality? And just saying, well, it's in lots of people's imagination does absolutely nothing to indicate that. There's lots of people who can imagine Bigfoot. The number of people does not increase the probability of Bigfoot existing. So you need to show it exists independent of imagination.
Yeah, you can experience direct perception of the self through realization. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Pratyaksha Vargamam Damyam Susukam Kartamavyam, that through this process, which is the perfection of religion, you'll directly perceive me.
Okay, that's nice. Lots of religions say that. Once it happens, then it's good evidence. Until it happens, it's not evidence.
But you will never actually be able to test that hypothesis unless you apply yourself to it.
Yes, lots of people have and have converted away from Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
So,
but that doesn't disprove anything. That's like saying lots of people bought this how to get six-pack abs course on Facebook, but not all of them got six-pack abs. It's like, sure,
Yes, but if the test is specifically that the God claims that you can, in fact, know them with 100% certainty, and it does not work with 100% certainty, then that is a falsification of the God statement.
Well, it's not. It's like if I'm selling my six-pack abs program on Facebook and I say, you follow this program, you'll get six-pack abs. You buy the program, and then you're like, nah, didn't work. But, maybe you just didn't do it. And that's what most people run into, is they just don't actually do it.
I said the thing you said to say. It didn't work. So obviously there's some additional criteria. It's not just to say the thing. It's you have to do some other set of things in addition to that. So you haven't provided like a whole list. What is the whole list here that I'm supposed to go through?
No, you just do that continually.
Oh God. So that's
a couple hours a day.
A day. So continually for like, so when can we falsify this? When can we say it definitely did not work? How many times do I have to say it until we can say, yep, it's false?
Well, there's no amount.
Okay, so in science, there's this thing called falsifiability. Like if I said there is a man named Bob in that direction, and you go 1,000,000 miles in that direction and do not find Bob, well, I can just say, oh, well, you need to go another 1,000,000 miles. He's out there somewhere. He's just there's no limit to how far you can travel. He's just in that direction somewhere. That's called unfalsifiable claims. So in order to be a scientific claim that actually qualifies as evidence, you need to make it falsifiable. You need to say, at this point, if you have not found Bob, then I was wrong. My fault. My theory was false. So in order for it to qualify as evidence, it needs to be falsifiable. You can say, okay, so if you've done this test to this extent and it fails, the test proves my hypothesis false.
But how are you going to construct a falsifiable claim using science about something that doesn't exist in the material world?
Easy. It just has to have an impact on the material world. So any novel testable prediction, for example, if Hare Krishna exists and I believe Hari Krishna will give me a gold brick if I pray to him, and I pray to him, and there is a gold brick in front of me that appears magically. That would be evidence of Hari Krishna, even though he exists outside of space-time.
Well, it wouldn't really, because you could posit any number, an infinite number of alternate hypotheses, including, covert extraterrestrials who are just messing with you.
Yes, you could do that for any hypothesis, but the one that can make the novel testable predictions is the one that has the evidence. So it doesn't matter. There's always infinitely many ways to explain any phenomenon, like what knocked over that cup. Could be squirrels, birds, someone knocked the table, the wind, the meteorite, aliens, leprechauns, magic bunnies, any number of things, infinitely many of them. But the one that is the correct evidence-wise, is the one that can predict something about it. So if I predict that a squirrel knocked it over and we see there are squirrel droppings, and we go up and check, and yes, there are squirrel droppings, then my hypothesis is by default the one that's supported. Now, it doesn't matter if after the fact you could say, well, I know that my magical leprechauns put the magic squirrel droppings there, and so I can explain that, and it's still consistent with my hypothesis. It doesn't matter. The fact that mine was able to make the testable prediction first and none of the others were means that my hypothesis is the one that gets the evidence. The same thing applies to a god. If you can say a gold brick is going to appear in front of me if I say this chant, and you say the chant and you get a gold brick, that is evidence of your hypothesis, including if it's something outside of the space-time. Just any novel testable predictions that you can do that are consistent and reliable, testable scientifically, it counts as evidence.
Yeah, so by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, people are able to give up all kinds of activities that you might call like unhelpful or unhealthy activities. Like for myself personally, I was working as a computer programmer, and my mind was like going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So every night I'd come home and smoke marijuana in order to like just chill out. This is the only time I ever voted. It was like 30 years ago. I voted for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and we didn't win. And I was like, this is a waste of time. So I've never voted since then. It's back on the referendum this year, but I've kind of changed my view on it now. Anyway, what happened to me was I started chanting this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And one day I came home from work, I smoked some marijuana, and I noticed that my mind had become more disturbed than it was before I smoked it. And so I took out my beads, because, we chant the mantra with beads. I chanted that Maha Mantra 108 times, and then I was completely sober. And since that day, which is like 23, 24 years ago, never smoked it again.
Okay, so things you do that affect your brain affect your brain. I don't see how this is particularly spectacular. So like chanting a mantra is something you do that affects your brain. It's neuroplasticity. We know that doing certain things repetitively has that effect on your brain. It's why people with obsessive compulsive disorder do things over and over and over again. And so doing something over and over and over again can cause you to be relaxed, can lower stress, and can change your mental states. Like, I don't see why any of that would be evidence of Hare Krishna, especially not if it wasn't a testable prediction.
Yeah, because Krishna says this is the process by which you can know me. And part of that process is that you become saintly along the way, that your bad qualities will diminish, and then your saintly qualities will increase. Compassion, patience.
Okay, so again, not evidence that Hare Krishna exists. The fact that chanting a meditation that has specific values and getting obsessed with that set of values means you will do things that are in correlation with that set of values. Like if you are a lover of cheese and you get indoctrinated into this cheese cult, then it is reasonable to say you will like cheese more if you are more into this cult. And so is that evidence that the cult god is real? No, it just means you're spending more time around cheese-related things, and the neuroplastic capabilities of your brain cause you to be more open to cheese. Like, this is not magic. It's just things that affect your brain affect your brain.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can come up with an infinite number of hypotheses like that, right? To retroactively or retrospectively describe something. But Krishna has made a testable prediction about it. And then you apply the process, and then you say, okay, that worked. So along the way, you have like validation or verification that, okay, this is actually doing what it said it would do on the box. So that increases your faith or your strength of your hypothesis that, okay, Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, just like he says he is.
Okay, so let me clarify. To be a testable prediction has to be novel, has to be something new. Like I can predict the sun is going to rise tomorrow, and the fact that the sun rises tomorrow is evidence the spaghetti monster is the real true God that created the universe. Clearly, no one's going to accept it as evidence. We already know the sun is going to rise tomorrow. So for it to be a good novel testable prediction, I have to like predict that gold brick is going to appear in front of me if I pray to the spaghetti monster. And if that happens, then that would be good evidence. So in order to be a testable prediction, it has to be something we don't already know. And the reason I keep bringing up these other examples is the things you're predicting are things we already know. Like psychology has already explained these. We've known these for tens of thousands of years before even Hinduism existed. So this is not a novel testable prediction. This is just common psychology. We know all this happens already. If you chant or get absorbed into an ideology, then you become more culpable or whatever, absorbent of the ideology's tenets. Like, yes, we already know that. That's why Rome banned religions. That's why many cultures kill off other religions. As we already knew that. So that's not a novel testable prediction. That's like saying the sun is going to rise tomorrow, therefore the spaghetti monster. Or, well, if I get absorbed into this ideology, therefore Hare Krishna. Like, no, we already know all of that. So it needs to be a new testable prediction, a novel thing that we don't know yet.
The thing about that is that, as Krishna says, the human form of life is meant for God realization. So all of the things that you mentioned are evidence that the human form of life really is neurologically designed for realizing the existence of God through these practices. Like animals don't do this kind of stuff. Only human beings do.
Actually, animals do the exact same kind of stuff. We've done many tests with monkeys where we gave them money. We actually introduced money to them. And when they get interested in money, they became obsessed with money and started to trade it firstly for sex was the first thing they did. So the exact same thing applies to animals where they get into this certain kind of an ideology that has these certain kinds of tenets, and their neuroplasticity causes them to become more open to those kinds of tenets. In this case, it was the doctrine of money. We gave them this ideology. They adopted the ideology. They became more obsessed with the ideology and started to adopt its principles. The exact same thing happens regardless of whether it's a religious belief or Star Trek. It doesn't make a difference at all, and does happen to every other animal those are these social ones.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get how that was a refutation of what I said.
Okay, so the condition you're describing is where if we have a religious belief and we start to do the things that are in the doctrine of the religious belief, then our belief system or our actions will start to mirror the doctrine of the religious belief. So we have an ideology. An ideology has tenets, and if we follow that ideology, our belief system will start to match it. The same thing applies to literally every ideology. It doesn't matter if it's political, monetary, economic, religious, they all work the exact same way. You have an ideology. If you begin to follow and get ingrained in that ideology, the neuroplasticity of the brain will start to mirror that, and you will start to understand it more and be more open to it. That's why most of the people who go into philosophy of religion, more of them convert to Christianity than the other way around. Because if you indoctrinate yourself with or inundate yourself with a certain ideology, you become open to that ideology's tenets. And it applies not only to Hare Krishna, but to literally every ideology, or literally every idea of ideology. So none of that is special. That's literally the same phenomenon we've seen in every human interaction ever.
Yeah, so the human being is designed for that. It's a feature of the human form of life.
Right, but that has nothing to do with religion. That's just how ideologies and neuroplasticity function. So like if you join a cheese cult, you are more likely to like cheese. Is that evidence that we are designed to like cheese? No. It's just evidence that we are a social creature, and then when we are a part of a social group, we tend to align with the social group. There's nothing about this that means that God exists anymore, then cheese is the supreme being.
Well, it's evidence that human beings have the capability to apply themselves to a process by which they can realize the existence of God. And Krishna comes into the material world and says, I'm God, and here's a process that you can apply yourself to by which you can realize me. So, I mean, human beings are capable of creating technology. They're capable of creating societies, secret societies, all kinds of stuff like that. And when they apply that same human faculty to realizing the existence of the Supreme Being, they're also capable of doing that. But what stops people from doing that is they start with a presupposition that God doesn't exist, and they just never apply themselves to it. So it's like someone who, just never does what it takes to get six-pack abs. They're just never going to get them. But you can.
Well, that's obviously false. I mean, most people don't start with the presupposition there is no God. Atheism is a minority position. So most people do presuppose there is a God, strangely enough. But presuppositions have nothing to do with it at all. It's simply that anytime you devote yourself to an ideology, or like getting six-pack abs, then your brain will change in order to mimic the things that you're doing. Like, and the more you do something, the more the neuroplasticity of your brain develops around the thing you're doing. Always. It doesn't matter what it is. It has nothing to do with religion or magical cheese. So saying that this is evidence of Hare Krishna because he said if you repeat this ideology over and over again that it'll change the neuroplasticity of your brain is no more evidence of Hare Krishna than the cheese cult saying, well, if you repeat these mantras of the cheese, then it'll cause neuroplasticity to change in your brain around the cheese. It isn't actually evidence of magical cheese any more than Hare Krishna.
How do you know that?
Because
without doing it?
What do you mean? Like, I'm granting that it works. So I know it works because of neuroplasticity. I'm saying that the fact it works isn't evidence of Hare Krishna because it works for contradictory ideologies equally.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that when you apply that faculty of the human being to a transcendent subject matter, you realize the existence of your own transcendental identity and the identity of that transcendental source of the spiritual material worlds. Now, if you apply it to any material thing like cheese or money or anything like that, you're going to realize a material result. But what I'm saying is that when you apply that, as Krishna says, he says, if you apply this process to me, you will know me without a doubt. That's actually the way to directly experience the existence of God.
It's also the way to directly experience homeopathy and ghosts and magic and mythical creatures and anything that humans come up with in our imagination. Like, literally that same method you're describing works for everything, whether it exists or not, because it's an idea in your head. And the more time you spend focusing on that idea in your head, the more you're going to believe it's real in, like, you're part of a cult or whatever. So,
okay, so your claim is that because you can develop like devotion to some imaginary thing that doesn't exist, therefore anything that you develop devotion to doesn't exist? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that, again, the criterion of evidence is we need some way to differentiate imagination from reality. So we have this method that you're proposing that we have a devotion for some ideology, and that if we have devotion for this ideology, we will come to believe it's real.
Well, I'm not saying a devotion to an ideology. I never mentioned ideology at all.
Hare Krishna, it's ideology, right? It's a religious ideology.
No, Krishna is a person.
Okay, so by ideology here, I'm just using it as a class, which would include religion in the person of Hare Krishna. So I'm using that word, not a word you're using. So
okay.
In this context, the method you're proposing is if you have a devotion for something and you focus on this something, you will eventually believe it exists or come to know it, is the words you used. And that same method can be used for Hare Krishna as well as the magical cheese monster, the spaghetti monster, homeopathy, magic, whatever. And so this method you're proposing cannot differentiate between imagination and reality because it leads us to the same conclusion that these imaginary things are real, even if you think Hare Krishna is real. So that method definitely does not work to differentiate imagination from reality. So that method is not evidence that Hare Krishna is real, because it could just as easily be one of the imaginary things.
The thing about it is, if we go back to the flying spaghetti monster, if you were to describe the flying spaghetti monster with the exact characteristics of Krishna, the flying spaghetti monster is the source of all spiritual and material worlds. You're basically just using a different word to describe Krishna, is all you're doing there.
Right. That's why I included many things like political ideologies, economic ideologies, magical cheese. Like, I'm making these distinctions to show these are not Hare Krishna. They're not at all like Hare Krishna. They're just material things we've made up specifically for the purpose of just making them up. We can believe in those silly things using the same method that you are prescribing to believe in Hare Krishna. So the method you're proposing can work for anything, whether it has Hare Krishna's properties or not, whether it's a contradiction to Hare Krishna, whether it's just a round square. It makes no difference, just because that's how the human brain works.
Yeah. Well, the difference between a magical cheese and Krishna is that magical cheese doesn't appear in the material world and say, I exist and I'm the source of all spiritual material worlds. And Krishna does.
Well, it appears in our imagination. We imagine it to do that, just like we imagine Hare Krishna does. But I don't see any evidence that Hare Krishna actually existed in the material world ever.
Yeah, well, thousands of people over thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of people, and more importantly, great sages like Valmiki, Vyasadeva, have accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Yes, and billions of people have accepted Islam and Christianity. That's not evidence they're true. So again, that's just showing people imagine it to be the case. But how do you show it is actually the case independent of people's imagination? Just quoting lots of people who believe it is just showing that it's in their imagination. Now, if you want to say it's outside of their imagination, how do you do that? Well, you do it with something like science.
Is anything outside our imagination?
Yes.
Can you give an example of something?
Yes, this camera lens is outside of my imagination.
How is it outside your imagination?
Because my imagination cannot affect it. I cannot lift it with my imagination. I cannot morph it with my imagination. I cannot change it with my imagination. If I threw it at you, I couldn't stop it with my imagination, and I couldn't imagine your sensation of it hitting you. My imagination has no impact on it whatsoever in the world. So the world is therefore independent of my imagination. It's a separate kind of a thing because it has different properties.
Okay. Yeah, I can get that.
So that would be an argument for two minds existing.
Well, and so independent of imagination does not mean that it's material world necessarily. So the distinction here is that there is imaginary things which I have control over. So I can like imagine a unicorn and transform it into an apple or whatever. And there are things that are outside of my imagination I do not have control over, like the TV in front of me. Now, it could be the case that TV is a part of a greater mind or whatever, or maybe a deeper level of my imagination. But there is definitely a distinction between the stuff in my imagination, which is the stuff I have control over, and the stuff outside of that, which I do not have control over.
But
whether we label that as material or not is independent of the argument.
How do you know that you're not imagining that you don't have control over it?
If I was imagining I didn't have control over it, I would still not have control over it because my imagination stopped me from having control over it. So there'd still be a difference.
But you wouldn't know. Like, how do you know that you control your imagination?
Because I can transform a unicorn into an apple at will.
Yeah. So that's like what you can see that you can do.
Yes.
And then there's these other things that you see that you can't do with your imagination.
Yes.
But how do you know that that is not a product of your imagination itself?
So I'm defining imagination as the stuff in my head I have control over. I'm giving that the class of the imaginary stuff.
Okay.
And then there's a class outside of that of the stuff I don't have control over. Now, the stuff I don't have control over could be material, it could be idealistic, it could be dualistic. I have no idea. I just know it's outside of the stuff I have control over in my head.
Yeah. Well, Krishna says that he is in control of all that stuff.
So does Jesus.
Jesus doesn't say that.
He does indeed. In fact, the Old Testament, he does say that multiple times. He controls the Alpha, the Omega, before time. I forget all the quotes because I haven't read
Jesus is not in the Old Testament.
Well, the Christian claim is Trinitarianism. Jesus is fully God and God is fully Jesus.
Yeah, okay.
So I like to use the...
So God says that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so I like to use the quote that Jesus drowned babies because Jesus and God are the same person. So,
okay. Well, I mean, here's the thing. That's just exactly what I said. Krishna or God controls all of that. Like,
right.
Because,
so I mean, the point I'm making here is that everybody can make the same claim. That's nice, but that's just an imaginary thing in your imagination. Now, how do you show it is of the non-imaginary class of things?
I think it's worth pointing out that the Christians claiming that and us claiming that isn't mutually exclusive.
In fact, it's the same thing. Like I said,
I could just
go to different countries. They call the sun Sol or Soleil or Inti or the sun.
Right. I mean, I think the Christian would argue it is a contradiction. They see them as separate entities. But if you want, I could just pick a different non-Hare Krishna ideology like the magic cheese or the spaghetti monster or whatever, which obviously would contradict because you agree that they're physical. So I can say, well, it's all powerful and created everything and is not Hare
Spaghetti
Krishna.
monster, though, is like almost like if you just evaluate it on its description of something, you can say you're actually describing Krishna.
What? The flying spaghetti monster is Krishna? I like this. I'm starting to become more of a fan of
We should have called
Krishna.
it a flying spaghetti monster debate. That would have been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, look, if you say the flying spaghetti monster is like the the origin of all spiritual material worlds, the origin of everything and the control of everything, and that, when you're touched by his noodly appendage, you can know him. We're talking about Krishna.
Yeah, that's okay. But so the point of my example would be like I could say this computer mouse is the eternal, all-powerful thingy of the world or whatever, and it's not conscious. It's a non-conscious creator of the universe or whatever. And so then it would be a contradiction to Hare Krishna, I believe, because I believe you think Hare Krishna is a person, so it has a consciousness, right?
Yeah, well, just like we see that, the light coming from the sun has heat and light in it, and we know that therefore the sun has light and heat in it. In the same way, we can see in this material world the existence of personality, individuality, and consciousness. So we can understand that in the supreme source of this world, individuality, personality, and consciousness must also be present.
All right, so to use a counter example, I can just say there is an ultimate creator of all spiritual and physical things, but it's non-conscious. There is, and just give it a name, the magical cheese monster or whatever. And so now I have a contradictory hypothesis to Hare Krishna, and I can use the exact same evidence you have to lead to that one as you do to Hare Krishna. So that methodology cannot differentiate between imagination and reality because it works equally as well for two contradicting hypotheses.
Well, yeah, there's this logical structure called Satkaryavad, which is that an effect cannot contain something that's not present in the cause. So having consciousness existing in the material world but not existing in the source, where would consciousness come from?
In philosophy, we call that a composition division fallacy. So the properties of the whole and the properties of the parts are separate, and they can both have separate properties. So, for example, no hydrogen atom or no hydrogen oxygen atoms have the property of wetness, but if you add enough together, you get wetness. Now, obviously, no molecule has the property of wetness, but it clearly came out of the combination of them. So the whole can have something that the parts or the origin does not have. There's no contradiction there. The same would apply to consciousness. It's an emergent property like wetness. The origin of everything could just be matter in motion, like in physics, and it can still create consciousness, even though it itself has no consciousness.
So I don't know what the specific technical philosophical term for this is, but the material world as it exists with consciousness within it is not separate from Krishna. Like there is only one fundamental thing, and it has variety within it. Like everything in this universe is like a solid continuum. Even if you look at Einstein's idea of like a block universe, even time and space, and like it's like exists as like one single unit with transformation within it, which means that the material world is not separate from Krishna. It's part of Krishna.
Okay, I mean that's a nice assertion, nice claim. But remember, my original argument is that I can come up with a hypothesis that's mutually exclusive to Hare Krishna, that the same evidence you're using can indicate. And you asked me, well, how can consciousness exist in this alternate hypothesis? And so I just said, consciousness can be an emergent property of purely matter with no consciousness.
Let's look at the claim that there's the same evidence. So, in what ways are the same evidence? Like, do we have great sages saying this is the case? Are there great sages saying that this philosophy you've described is the case?
Yes, anybody who devotes themselves to an ideology, whatever the ideology is, because of neuroplasticity, can cause them to believe anything. So, great sages, I wouldn't consider authorities to be any more or less evidence in the case of testimony at all.
That doesn't disprove anything. I mean,
what?
Like just to say that if you apply yourself to something that you can, that doesn't say anything about the truth of the claim.
So the claim is that here is some methodology we can use to indicate Hare Krishna exists.
Yes.
For that claim to be true, then the methodology has to be able to differentiate imagination from reality. Yep. And so if I can show that the methodology cannot differentiate between imagination and reality, that disproves your claim that this method can indicate Hare Krishna, because it cannot differentiate imagination from reality.
But can you actually differentiate reality from imagination anyway?
Yes.
How? How do you know that what you're actually experiencing right now is real and you're not just imagining that it's real?
Remember before where I said the stuff in my imagination I can transform from a unicorn to an apple, and then the stuff outside of it I can't. The stuff outside of it is the class I call reality.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between the stuff in my imagination which I can translate if I want, and the stuff outside of it which I can't. And the stuff outside of it is the stuff I'm calling reality.
Yeah, but you have no way of knowing whether that's actually real or if that's just your perception.
So again, I'm just giving it the label that this is real. By real, I mean it's the stuff that I can't imaginarily manipulate.
Yeah, I get that. But at its fundament of that, there's some axiomatic thing that you're accepting. But even in that idea, you accept that there are some things that are outside of your control. But even your perception itself, as far of what's possible and what effects you can have, as far as you can know, that's outside of your control as well.
Yes, the outside of your control part is the reality part.
But what you consider to be outside of your control, see, you're asserting that some things are outside of your control as if that's like a hard reality.
Yes.
But what's your actual proof that that is a hard reality and not simply an illusion?
The fact that I cannot transform my TV into an apple at will and back is like a fact. I literally am incapable of doing this. Now, maybe there's some ability deeper in my mind I haven't unlocked yet that may allow me to do this, but I don't have it yet. So that's how I can know. I do not have the ability to do this as of yet. And so it would fit into the class of reality things that I don't have control over.
Okay, but you have no way of knowing. See, that's what I mean about atheism being an overreach. It's like, as you admitted there may be some deeper ability within your mind that you haven't unlocked yet. So you can't categorically rule it out as like, it's just definitely 100% impossible, cannot be done.
Well, again, in philosophy, you don't need absolute certainty to have knowledge. So that's not a requirement that any philosopher actually says you need to be able to make claims.
Wouldn't that stop scientific progress, though, if you adopted that as like well, since nobody has ever flown, with a heavier than air, heavier than air aircraft, it's just, we don't need complete knowledge of everything to be able to say that it's not possible.
No, because saying that it doesn't exist does not mean you can't continue to test it to try and break the rule. Like we do that all the time.
Yeah. So that's how you can understand Krishna, by applying exactly that same thing to the process that he gives.
Sure. And if you can actually demonstrate it works, that would be great. But I'm still waiting for that.
Well, it's ultimately in your own subjective experience, which you've pointed to as like your ultimate evidence for reality.
Sure. So I'm still waiting for a way that can differentiate imagination from reality. Like I can do it with my experience because I can't manipulate things like the TV, but I can my unicorn. But I don't see a way to do that in the case of Hare Krishna. Like in that, you need some additional metric there that you haven't provided yet. The one you did provide, you can think about it really hard. That works equally as well for things I can imagine in my head and manipulate, and things I can't imagine in my head and manipulate. So that doesn't give us a way to differentiate.
Well, it does in a sense, because at the end of the day, people talk about flying spaghetti monster and it's kind of a bit of a joke and everything, and it's pretty hilarious. It's very well done, but people don't devote themselves to actually prosecuting and executing that as a process. Whereas with Krishna consciousness and other, religious processes that people have devoted themselves to it, people don't do that for magic cheese.
So I see the point of the magic cheese is like the magic bread of Christ. It's literally just an analogy to things that already exist. So we do literally value things that are analogous to the magical cheese. The point of these analogies is that they are mocking religious examples that do exist. So we do literally see those things that people do literally devote themselves to that. In the case of Jesus, it's the magic bread of Christ instead of magical cheese. So we literally do devote and worship very silly things like wooden statues or magical cows, like golden calf statues, all kinds of things. Like literally anything you can imagine, people have worshipped it at some point. So yes, we do. We definitely do have people devoting their lives to very silly ideas all over the world. So I don't think that is a good argument saying, well, people don't devote their lives to silly things. Like, yeah, they do. They really, really do.
Yeah. Well, again, I would point to that as like, it's part of the design of the human being that they have the ability to be able to do that. And that's actually the process for realizing reality beyond the limitations of the physical world.
So our ability to imagine made up things that don't exist and devote ourselves to those things is the same ability we use to imagine the ultimate supreme being of the universe and devote ourselves to it.
Yes.
What is stopping that thing from just being, well, maybe it's just one of the imaginary things we're devoting ourselves to?
The fact that Krishna comes into the material world and says, I exist.
And where does that happen that's not just in our imagination?
Where does anything happen that's not just in our imagination?
The TV, for example, can't manipulate it without my mind. So that does. Where's the Hare Krishna be in the same place as the TV?
Yeah, but even with that example, it's like, you're imagining that you can't manipulate it with your mind.
Well, if you could show me how I could imagine manipulating it with my mind and that would allow me to do so, then sure. But until then, the evidence indicates I'm not.
I mean, I once, before I started chanting Hare Krishna, I once took this LSD tab, and then there was this ant running around on my arm, and I was looking at it, and I was like, how does that ant decide whether to go left or right?
Arjuna, I think you're breathing on your mic. I think I keep getting
heavy breathing.
Yeah.
I've got a gate, so it's probably not coming through, but thanks.
That ant, he's running around on there, and he runs into a hare, and I'm like, what is going through his mind? How does he decide to go left or right? And I was just looking at him going like, what is he thinking? And he just immediately froze like this and put his legs up like, and I was like, hey, that's pretty weird. Then he started running around again, and I did it again. And then he stopped moving and started doing that. And I was like, I'd started like practicing yoga and studying like yoga texts and stuff. And they were describing like these abilities of the mind to do things that people today have got no idea are possible for human beings to do. And I was like, yeah, okay. I just like literally influenced the mind of that insect with my mind. Yeah, you actually can do it.
What? That would be a great testable prediction. Like if you can actually show that you can influence the minds of insects by thinking about them, that is a fantastic testable prediction. That would be great evidence. If you could do that, you would just overthrow so much in science and win a Nobel Prize. Definitely give me a novel testable prediction where we can repeat this. That would be great evidence.
Yeah, well, once I started chanting Hare Krishna, I stopped taking LSD, so I can't reproduce that one.
That's okay. Just tell us how to do it. We will reproduce it if it can be done, and that would be great evidence of your hypothesis.
Well, it's like, I'm in a bodybuilding competition next weekend, and the whole thing is like imagining what's going to happen. Like, imagining what I'm going to look like, imagining how I'm going to win, all that kind of stuff. And, like training for anything, it's like you visualize something and then, it manifests, it comes into being. So you can, through your meditation and through fixing your mind on something, manifest it without a doubt.
Well, I was talking about like the impacting animals, like because we know animals are independent of our imagination. So if you can use your imagination to impact animals, and we can repeat that experiment, that is great evidence. Show me how to do that. I absolutely want that because I can then just send the bears to kill all my enemies. It's great.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that establishes the existence of God, but I think what that points to, and again, it's anecdotal evidence, right? It's from my own personal experience. But ultimately, when you're talking about like a transformation of personal consciousness and different levels of awareness, there's no way that for one person at one level of awareness or consciousness that you can demonstrate something that requires a different level of awareness or consciousness. It's just impossible, axiomatically.
Well, I'm saying what you did happened. I'm going to say it's true or whatever. And now I want to repeat it. I want to be able to show other people how to do this scientifically. So if you can give me a method that we can repeat this process, that's fantastic. I would love it. That is great evidence. Tell me how to do this.
I myself, like at the time, was like, like I'm missing, like when you do something and you understand like the causal kind of chain behind it, or the theoretical framework that kind of like, the model of how these things interact, what they are, how they relate with each other.
I'm not sure what you mean.
It's kind of like, let me see if I can think of an example. Like the cup falling over example, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, a squirrel could have knocked that cup over. So there's the squirrel, and then it hits it. There's like this kinetic energy that gets transferred. It changes the angle of momentum or whatever of this thing. It falls over like that. So you understand, everything about how they interact. Now, for me, I saw the observation of like, I was thinking about this thing in this particular way, and it affected its action, but I have no model of like, what's the relationship or the causal chain, cause and effect between that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't expect you to have that. My goal is to do the same thing you did. I don't need an explanation of how it happened. I couldn't care less. If we can see there is a testable, demonstrable result from whatever method we're using, then we can try and figure out what's causing it. But once we show it can happen, that's all the evidence we need. So if you can show that because of Hare Krishna or whatever, that you can communicate with animals or influence animals, whatever way that happens, we don't need to know at all. That is fantastic evidence. Let me test this and show it to be the case. I would love that.
So it's very simple. You just need to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, like that, a couple of hours each day.
Okay, again, falsifiability. Need the falsifiability. At what point can we show it does not work?
2 years, or your money back.
Okay. Hey, that's a testable prediction. That's infinitely better than pretty much every other religious group. So I'll give you that. And if it works for some people, I will count it for sure.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, there's many different ways. People get into different religious practices, different religions. They're attracted by different cultures, that kind of stuff. But if there is a way for you to know the supreme source of everything, it's not going to be through your material senses or through logic or through, material science. It's going to require some science, which is like, and when I say science, I mean a reproducible, systematic process that is descending. There's no way that, you can discover it from within the material universe if it is the source of the material universe itself.
Wait, no, you gave a great way that would totally work. Like if we can chant this mantra and affect animals, that would do everything you're saying it can't do. Like that would literally work.
Yeah, but that's because Krishna came and said, do this. Nobody like discovered that.
That's totally fine. Like if we can do this method and this method has a testable result in reality that we can demonstrate, that is evidence of Hare Krishna, even if Hare Krishna exists outside of space and time. Like we don't actually need to be able to see things outside of space and time to have evidence of what is outside of space and time. We can just make testable predictions like what you just said. Like if we can literally affect animals just by thinking about it while chanting this mantra, that would be evidence of what the thing outside of space-time is like, because this works whereas other things don't. So that would be great evidence.
Okay, I learned something new about chanting the Hare Krishna mantra.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll get back to you in 2 years if I remember to do this. I don't think I'm going to do it. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. But it was a testable prediction, so I give you credit for that. And if someone wants to try it in the chat, spend the next 2 years devoting yourself and let me know how it goes. We'll testable result this.
Speaking of the chat, how about we do some
Q&A?
Q&A, okay. I'll start getting those ready. So if you want to put a question in the chat, put question marks at the beginning and I'll start pulling questions up on the screen. But just keep going for another couple of minutes while I get that ready.
So weightlifting competition, how much do you weigh?
77 kilos now.
I'm American.
Oh, multiply by 2 pounds. Math, arithmetic. I don't have my slide rule. Hang on, let me just try a calculator. I got a slide rule application. No, I'm joking. Calculator. 77 multiplied by 2.2 pounds equals 169.4 pounds. So 170.
Wow, I'm bigger than you are. I'm 185.
185. How tall are you?
6'2".
Okay.
How tall are you?
167 centimeters.
Oh God. All right.
Divide
Google
by
this.
2.54 equals that's inches.
Right.
Divide by 12 for feet, right?
This
12
was
inches to a foot.
Yep.
5'4".
Wow. I did not expect you to be that short. I thought you were a lot taller than that.
Nah, tiny.
So we got a question?
Yeah, can you guys read it? So Critical Chris, it has also, this was from earlier on, I just thought it would be good to pull up. It is also has to be a logical consequence of the hypothesis. What's the entailment from Krishna existing to a change in lifestyle?
Sorry, can you run that by me again?
It also has to be a logical consequence of the hypothesis. What's the entailment from Krishna existing to a change in lifestyle? So chanting Hare Krishna causes people to change their lifestyle. That just shows chanting Hare Krishna causes people to change their lifestyle. How does it follow from that God exists?
It's kind of like Srila B.R. Sridhar Swami said, like it's signs along the way. So as I pointed out before, it strengthens the hypothesis that, okay, this this process works.
Okay, William Duke, can Jump repeat his opening argument as to why it can be positively claimed that God does not exist?
Sure. So everything is imaginary until demonstrated otherwise. So if you have a hypothesis, like what knocked over the cup, and you're trying to explain what did it, you can come up with infinitely many ways to explain what did it. And all of them except one are imaginary, the truth, whatever that is. And so you need some way to differentiate the imaginary ones from the real ones, like a testable prediction is the way science does it. So if we say, if my hypothesis that a squirrel knocked over the cup is correct, I will be able to make a future testable prediction that we will see squirrel droppings around the cup. And we can test that, go over and look and see if there are squirrel droppings. That's good evidence that that hypothesis is not imaginary. And if you cannot make novel testable predictions, then you have no reason to believe that your hypothesis is nothing but imaginary. So until you have some kind of evidence that can demonstrate that your hypothesis is not imaginary, it is reasonable to conclude that it is nothing but imaginary. And so all of the hypotheses for God that are unable to make novel testable predictions, it's reasonable to conclude they are imaginary. And since none of them have ever been able to make novel testable predictions, it's reasonable to conclude that all God hypotheses are imaginary because none of them can differentiate between imagination and reality. So that is why it's reasonable to conclude that there are no gods at all, because none of them can make novel testable predictions. So it's reasonable to conclude they are all just imaginary.
Is that like saying an absence of evidence is reason to conclude something is imaginary?
An absence of evidence that something is not imaginary is reason to conclude it is imaginary. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I guess that as a working hypothesis, you could take that approach, but what you really miss out on then is the opportunity of actually discovering it through direct perception.
Direct perception seems to not work as a method to differentiate imagination from reality.
But that's exactly every time we come to this, you always go to direct perception as your test for what's imaginary and what's real. I can't affect the television, so therefore the television is real, but that's your just direct perception.
Right, it's the direct perception plus an additional methodology to that. So it's not just direct perception, it's direct perception plus this way to differentiate the imaginary things and the non-imaginary things. So yes, you use direct perception in addition to another methodology, and those combined things gives us a way to differentiate, not just direct perception. Direct perception on its own does not.
All right, Achudananda Das. Joshua, how many years have you chanted this Hare Krishna mantra, and what experience have you had with that? What experiences have you had with that made you believe there is a God named Krishna?
Well, I've been chanting it since 96, 97. So how long's that? Maths.
23 years?
23 years. So 23 years, yeah. What experience have you had with that made you believe there is a God named Krishna? I mean, I shared about what happened with smoking marijuana. I mean, I left New Zealand and went and lived in South America for 3 years. I was like, one time in South America, we had to go from Peru to Ecuador to get our passports stamped. I was wearing my Hare Krishna robes. It's early in the morning because we'd traveled overnight. We get to Ecuador, it's in like a complete uprising because America had started buying their bananas from Costa Rica, and now all the Ecuadorians can't sell their bananas anywhere, so they're all losing money. They all go into a riot, and then they've blocked off all the roads every few hundred meters, and then to get past, you have to like take one form of transport, then you have to pay these people at the next roadblock, and then, so we end up on these bicycles. These guys are cycling us. There's two of us. The other guy's a lot smaller than me, and his bicycle starts to go further ahead, and my guy's falling behind. And I think, oh, this is a bit dodgy. Then about 6 or 7 guys come the other way. They start talking in Spanish real fast with my guy on his bike. Then they turn around, they're riding alongside him. Then they suddenly stop, and then they pull these knives out of their bike handles. And my guy who I'm riding with, who I paid 50 cents to, US cents, pulls a knife out of his bike handle. I was like, now what? So I just jumped off the bike and just started walking straight down the road away from them, chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, like this, waiting for the like knife in my back or something. And then next thing, a couple minutes later, the guy pulls up alongside me and goes, "Oh, jump on." So I jump back on the bike, and then he continues taking me down the road. And I had like lots of experiences like that. And the thing about that is, like, without having started chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, I'm just some guy from New Zealand. I would never have found myself in Ecuador in the middle of a riot, rolling around chanting Hare Krishna.
So what happened with the knives? Was he like a master knifeman, and all the other guys were like dead on the side when it's just him left and covered in blood? It's like, we got this, we're going, we're good.
No, dude,
really paid off.
He was waiting to get his cut of the whatever they managed to get from me. I was like, "Et tu, Brute? No, you as well." Yeah. But then, like, yeah, I just was like, yeah, I mean, if I hadn't been chanting Hare Krishna, and if chanting Hare Krishna wasn't my thing, I would have been like, what I considered I could manipulate, and what was like a hard reality out there that was immutable would have been completely different. I didn't even know what I was going to do. I was like, I'm just going to chant Hare Krishna. And so I just did that. And then, those guys with the knives just effectively disappeared.
Right, Ruslan, if I set a text-to-speech bot that will chant this mantra for 2 years, will this bot know Krishna?
Well, if you have the bot doing it so that you can hear it, you'll know Krishna. You should do that, TJump. You want to get the controlling the animals, there's the shortcut. You get a bot to do it for you.
I like it. We're getting a lot closer to the how to test this now.
JP Sears did the 4-hour spiritual week or something video, and he recorded himself saying all his affirmations, and then put it on repeat on iTunes so he wouldn't have to say them, and then he put it on mute so he wouldn't have to listen to them. Sorry, I've got to find the next question. That's not a question. Next.
Jump, I have. It seems Russian.
No, I just started the screen snipping and then realized I had to scroll down. Where were we?
Yeah, I should write that thing for you so we can put the YouTube comments into OBS automatically.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, Josh has just now promised to write a code for OBS. So anyone who uses OBS for live streaming will be able to hit up Josh and get the code, and then you can automatically just click on a comment and it will appear in OBS just like it does in StreamYard.
You just have to enter the registration code when you install it. It's Hare Krishna.
Critical Chris again. Would not having a changed life count as evidence against the God hypothesis? If not, how is a changed life evidence as neither? Hang on. Evidence as neither state of affairs raises the probability of the hypothesis being true.
It's kind of like faith more than anything else. Not having a changed life doesn't count as evidence against it, in the same way that, like, if you buy my 6-pack ab course and someone doesn't get 6-pack abs, it doesn't invalidate that, you can get 6-pack abs, and there is a process that if you follow it, you can get it.
Well, I think it's a more specific question, like asking if you really genuinely did all of the steps involved and did not get the results, would that count as evidence against your hypothesis?
Yeah, it would.
Well, you could add we'd have to add a statistical basis too. How many people would it need to be that don't get the result before it's evidence? If somebody gets laser eye surgery and it's not successful, does that mean laser eye surgery doesn't work?
Oh yeah, that would definitely be a second question. Like, if you did put in the effort and you did not get the work, then you would be justified in not believing. But how many people would be able to go through that and not get the result until an independent observer would be able to conclude there is no Hare Krishna? Is it just one person? If they could definitively prove this person did do the work and didn't get the result, would that disprove Hare Krishna? Because Hare Krishna says you will always get the result if you do this genuinely.
I don't think so. And here's why I say that, because in the Bhagavatam, it talks about the story of Ajamil, and he was a brahmana and a devotee, and he became very attached to sex life, and he had like a 3-year-old, and he was like in his 80s. And he was very attached to his child, but he named his child Narayan, which is one of the names of Krishna. And anyway, he just like kind of gave up all of his spiritual practice and everything, was just completely absorbed in this little kid. And then time came where he was dying, leaving his body. The Yamadutas came, these entities who come to pull his subtle body and his soul out of that physical body. And then he saw them as they were coming to get him, and he freaked out, and he was calling out for his son Narayan. And because he called a name of Krishna at the time of death, the Vishnu Dutas came and said, no, you can't take this guy, because he was sinful, so they were going to take him to be punished, before he gets incarnated in his next life. And they said, no, you can't take him because he called the name of Krishna at the time of death, so we're going to take him away. So that story there indicates that even if someone, does the whole thing and then claims that they never got any result out of it, the ultimate test is at the moment of death and what happens to them at that point. So according to the canon of Krishna consciousness, it wouldn't be falsified.
So was his son's name just Krishna, and he called his son's name and it happened to be the same as Krishna, so they didn't or be like, so he didn't believe, it was just because the name was the same?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I named my son like that.
All right. So Josh, is there a first specific reason that convinced you this God is real?
This God, I mean,
how did you become a Hare Krishna first?
How did I become a Hare Krishna? So I was raised as a Christian, and kind of like, I remember being like 10 years old and asking on a Christian camp late at night, to the camp counselor guy or whatever, like, what about was a problem of evil, all that kind of stuff. Why would God create these living entities from nothing and then say, you have to love me and accept me, otherwise I'm going to send you to burn in hell for eternity? I was like, dude, that sounds weird. That doesn't sound like a loving God to me. It sounds abusive. So, I was like, what about these people who are born in these other places, never heard about Jesus? What happens to them? And, it didn't work for me. So I kind of fell away from that. And then I started practicing yoga and doing meditation. And then for me, it's been kind of like, it's just mystical, because like, if you like, here's the easy way. If you want to know if God is real or not, you just pray to God, if you are real, please reveal yourself to me. I want to know. And that's how it's been for me. Like, I just went like on a journey. I read these books. It said, in the books it said you can only go so far through the practice of meditation and yoga by yourself. You need to find a guru. all yoga comes from the Bhagavad Gita. So I was like, okay, I need to find a guru. So left out of my house, went hitchhiking around the country. New Year's Eve, 1996, I arrive in this small town, the exact geographical center of New Zealand, and I'm walking down the street, and this tall, orange-robed American guy walks up to me with a Bhagavad Gita in his hand, and this goes like this. He's like, hey, we're just showing people this book today. It's Bhagavad Gita. Have you heard of it? And I'm like, I'm looking for that book. I'll take it. And then just like took it, you know? So, you know, I won't be so bold to say that I've seen Krishna, even though he's like right here. But I have seen signs along the way, and I'm encouraged. And so it's just been, mystical revelation.
All right. Jai Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda is saying the founder of our movement predicted a nuclear holocaust in about 3 years. Would that be proof of God if that happens? You want to comment on that?
Could you say that whole thing one more time? Could you say the whole name?
So, Jaya is pointing out that Prabhupada predicted a nuclear holocaust in 3 years.
Could you say her actual name?
Oh, Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. We sing it too. It's part of a song. Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gora Bhakta Vrinda. I'm not much of a singer though. Do you want to comment on that, or should I?
Well, TJump, would you accept that as conclusive proof?
If it was specifically like they said, my God is real, my God predicts that there's going to be a nuclear holocaust at this location at this time, and it happens, then yes, that would be good evidence.
I have an issue with that kind of prediction because Prabhupada didn't claim to be infallible with regards to, predicting mundane things like what's going to happen with politics. And he would comment on it, but he would be clear when he was commenting on these things that he was giving an opinion and not giving absolute knowledge. And these mundane things can go in different directions depending on what decisions people make. So I wouldn't really give too much weight to that kind of prophecy. I wouldn't call it a prophecy.
I would be kind of like, okay, it's interesting, but let me see a little bit more about what's behind this, because alternative hypotheses of how it was predicted. Like maybe they got someone on the inside who knows, or I don't know, maybe astrology is real. Who knows?
Okay, are there any more questions? I think I've got through them all. If I've missed it, maybe you can...
a lower standard of what he requires to believe in God than me.
I think that might be it for the questions. Maybe some more ones will come in.
I saw Tim Marwick was asking about the insects.
Oh, did I miss his one? There's a lot of comments which aren't questions. I can't see one from Tim. Maybe he can just comment it again if he still wants to ask it. Going back to the analogy of looking for, what were you saying? What was your analogy, Tom, of looking for somebody in the woods and just saying you just have to keep going further, and anyone who doesn't find them, you just tell them to go farther?
Yeah, like unfalsifiable claim. If I said Bob is somewhere in that
Bob,
direction,
right.
you travel 1 million miles and don't find Bob. Well, I can say, well, no, my hypothesis has not been falsified, because Bob could just be more farther that way. You haven't checked all the way that way yet. And so you just keep going infinitely and never find Bob, and I can never claim that. Yeah, exactly. So
what if
another 2 years?
What if over a period of thousands of years, millions of people have found Bob, and currently in this world today, there's thousands of people who have also found Bob?
Well, if you can show us how to find Bob, that's great. We'll find Bob.
Here's that mantra again.
Just saying.
Oh, I think there's like a bar in the middle that I thought it was an I originally, but it's not an I, right?
Yeah, I should have made it like
a pause.
Slap.
It's just a pause.
It's a line break.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I can actually.
All right. Well, should we wrap it up then, or you guys want to? I mean, there hasn't been any. Nobody's been hurling turds.
What? What happened to the people that we paid to hurl turds at TJump?
I prayed the spaghetti monster smote them with his noodly appendage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so in summary, let me see if I can summarize your argument, TJump. So really the basis, the core of your argument is this, can't remember what the name of it is, like falsifiability, or can you just remind me what the name of that philosophical?
Fallibilism.
Fallibilism. Yeah, that it's not necessary to have complete knowledge in order to falsify something.
It's not necessary to have absolute certainty to have knowledge.
Okay, it's not necessary to have absolute certainty to have knowledge. And then you made the argument that because we can see that we can conceive of mythical things like unicorns, leprechauns, Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, that we can imagine, but which we can never verify that exists, and we have very good reason to believe that they don't exist, unless we can come up with some kind of testable prediction or falsifiable test for the existence of God that would distinguish them from that class of these other imagined beings like the Loch Ness Monster and leprechauns, we could reasonably conclude and treat the idea of God as the same kind of class of thing, a thing that people imagine exists, but, for all we know, it's just something that they imagine exists.
Yeah, that's pretty close. I just say it as everything is imaginary until demonstrated otherwise. And so if you have no way to differentiate whether your hypothesis is imaginary or not imaginary, then it's reasonable to conclude it's imaginary.
Mm.
Do you want to see if you can steel man Josh's argument, Tom?
Sure. Josh believes that there is a God who created all matter and non-material things called Hare Krishna, and that you can know it by chanting the mantra for 2 years, like several hours a day for 2 years, and you'll get to know him, that he exists, have a personal revelation of some kind.
All right, I guess.
I'm convinced.
Sorry?
That's the best argument I've heard for Krishna consciousness from an atheist.
I guess we'll wrap it up here. Someone wants us to get TJump to chant the mantra again without the I.
Sure. Make it go faster. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare, Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, 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 Hare, Hare.
I should have done this.
There you go.
Yeah.
You're on your way
to
controlling.
There's a bigger version of it. But anyway, once it's enough.
It's easy.
I was trying to get a high resolution one. Anyway, so thanks for tuning in. We've got some more debates with TJump coming in next week. I'll post the time later, but it's happening at our 6 a.m. because we've got a devotee in South Africa called Varahadas debating TJump on does God exist? That one should be interesting. Good old fashioned, does God exist?
This one.
Huh?
It's like the inverse of this argument.
Yeah, the inverse of this debate. That should be good.
Awesome.
And then I'm in the process of scheduling Graham Oppie and Dr. Howard Resnick. Dr. Graham Oppie, I should say too. That should be interesting. That'll probably happen in December because they're both very busy people. And if you like this, be sure to subscribe so you can see more of our videos and let us know what you think down in the comments and hit that like button. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.